Maribel stood in front of the office door with a crowbar in her trembling hands. 3 days after burying her husband Oswin in the frozen ground of their small Vermont town, she could not wait another moment. For 23 years of marriage, this door had been locked every single night at exactly 9 o'clock. Oswin would disappear inside with his laptop, and she would hear the click of the deadbolt echoing through their farmhouse. He told her it was work, confidential legal documents that required privacy. She had believed him because that is what wives do. The crowbar splintered the doorframe with a crack that seemed too loud in the silent house. Maribel's heart hammered against her ribs as the door swung open, revealing darkness beyond. She flipped the light switch and gasped. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs. But these were not family photos or vacation memories. These were surveillance images, printed and pinned with military precision. Images of her, but also of other women. Dozens of women she had never seen before, captured in candid moments, walking to cars, entering homes, sitting in coffee shops. Maribel stepped closer to the wall, her legs weak beneath her. Each photograph had a label underneath. Names, dates, locations. She saw Subject 7, Maribel Hoffman, acquisition date, March 2001 beneath a photo of herself from 23 years ago, standing outside a bookstore in Burlington. She had met Oswin that very day. He had helped her carry books to her car, charming and attentive. But this photo had been taken before they spoke, from across the street, through a telephoto lens. Her hands began to shake violently as the truth crashed over her like ice water. She moved along the wall, reading labels beneath other women's faces. Subject 1, Naoma Fletcher, status, terminated 1996. Subject 4, Calla Brennan, status, relocated 1999. Subject 12, Trina Oswald, current location, unknown. There were 43 women in total, each numbered, each tracked. Maribel felt bile rise in her throat. What did terminated mean? What kind of sick game had her husband been playing? And why had she never suspected that the man she slept beside each night was capable of something this sinister? In the center of the room sat an enormous oak desk with 3 computer monitors, all still humming with power. Maribel approached slowly, afraid of what she might find. The screens displayed databases, spreadsheets with columns labeled physical description, daily routine, vulnerabilities, acquisition strategy. Her own name appeared in one file that was hundreds of pages long. Every detail of her life had been documented with clinical precision. Where she shopped, what time she went to bed, the names of her childhood friends, her fears, her dreams, everything. Maribel sank into the leather chair, her mind reeling. She had thought her marriage was normal, even happy. Oswin had been attentive, loving, protective. Too protective, she now realized. He had slowly isolated her from friends, convinced her to quit her job, moved her to this remote farmhouse where neighbors were miles away. She had mistaken his control for devotion. She had been so blind, so stupidly blind. And now he was dead from a sudden heart attack, leaving her alone with this nightmare. She pulled open the desk drawer with shaking hands and found a leather journal, its pages filled with Oswin's neat handwriting. The first entry was dated 1994. The collection begins today, it read. I have refined my methods. I have learned from past mistakes. This time, I will build something perfect. Maribel's blood turned to ice as she flipped through pages describing hunts, selections, and acquisitions. The final entry was dated 2 weeks before Oswin's death. Maribel suspects nothing. She is the crown jewel of my collection, the one who lasted longest. But maintenance grows tiresome. Perhaps it is time to begin the selection process for Subject 44. Maribel dropped the journal as if it had burned her, her scream echoing through the empty house. 23 years earlier, Maribel had been a graduate student working on her master's thesis in literature at the University of Vermont. She spent long hours at the campus bookstore, surrounded by the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. Life felt full of possibility then. She was 26 years old, smart, independent, and excited about her future. The day she met Oswin, she had been carrying an armful of research books about Gothic romance novels, struggling to balance them as she left the store. He appeared beside her like a hero from one of her books. "Let me help you with those," Oswin had said, his smile warm and disarming. He was 38, a successful attorney with silver threading through his dark hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He carried her books to her car, and they talked for an hour in the parking lot. He was intelligent, well-read, and genuinely interested in her research. When he asked for her number, Maribel felt like she had won some kind of lottery. A handsome, successful older man wanted to date her. Her friends had been jealous. The courtship had been intense and romantic. Oswin sent flowers to her apartment every week, took her to expensive restaurants in Burlington, and listened attentively when she talked about her thesis. He seemed fascinated by everything about her. Looking back now, with the horror of the office fresh in her mind, Maribel realized he had not been fascinated, he had been documenting. Every detail she shared had been recorded, catalogued, and stored in his growing files. She had been studied like a specimen under glass. 6 months into their relationship, Oswin proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Champlain. Maribel said yes without hesitation. Her parents loved him, her advisor praised him, and all her friends said she was lucky. The wedding was small and elegant, held at a historic inn with views of the Green Mountains. Maribel wore her grandmother's lace dress and felt like a princess. Oswin gazed at her during the ceremony with such intensity that it made her blush. She had thought it was love burning in his eyes. After the wedding, changes came gradually. Oswin suggested she take a semester off to settle into married life. Then he proposed they move from Burlington to a farmhouse he had inherited in rural Vermont, 40 minutes from the city. "You can write your thesis in peace," he told her. "No distractions, just you and your books and the beautiful countryside." Maribel agreed because it sounded romantic. The farmhouse was indeed beautiful, a 2-story colonial with wide porches and ancient maple trees. But it was also isolated, with the nearest neighbor 3 miles away down a dirt road. Oswin converted one of the downstairs rooms into an office and installed a new lock on the door. Legal confidentiality, he explained when Maribel asked why he needed such a heavy deadbolt. "I handle sensitive cases. Can't risk anyone accessing my files." She accepted this explanation without question. Why would she doubt her husband? He was an attorney, he had important work. She busied herself with settling into the house, arranging furniture, planting a garden, and working on her thesis in the sunny kitchen. But her thesis never progressed the way she hoped. Oswin always needed her help with something. Could she run an errand for him? Could she make dinner early because he had an important call? Could she spend the afternoon organizing his files, the ones kept outside the locked office? Maribel's days filled with tasks that seemed important but left her exhausted and behind on her work. When she mentioned returning to campus, Oswin's face darkened. "Why do you need to go back? Don't you have everything you need here? Am I not enough for you?" His hurt tone made her feel guilty for even suggesting it. Eventually, she stopped mentioning it altogether. Sitting in the office 3 days after Oswin's funeral, Maribel forced herself to keep searching despite the nausea churning in her stomach. She opened another drawer and found dozens of USB drives, each labeled with a number corresponding to the women on the wall. Her hands trembled as she inserted the drive labeled Subject 7, Maribel, into one of the computer towers. The screen filled with video files, hundreds of them, organized by date. She clicked on the oldest one, dated March 2001, the day they met. The video showed her walking across the university campus, completely unaware she was being filmed. The camera followed her into the bookstore, zooming in on her face as she browsed the shelves. Oswin's voice narrated from behind the camera. Subject shows ideal characteristics. Intelligent but isolated. Family lives out of state. Few close friends. Perfect candidate for long-term acquisition. Will initiate contact today. Maribel watched in horror as the video showed Oswin waiting outside the bookstore, timing his approach perfectly as she struggled with her books. Everything had been planned. She clicked through more videos, watching years of her life unfold through Oswin's hidden cameras. There were cameras everywhere in the house, she realized with growing horror. In the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. No space had been private. Every moment of her life for 23 years had been recorded and catalogued. She watched herself reading in bed, singing while cooking dinner, crying alone in the bathroom when she thought Oswin was in town. He had seen everything, recorded everything, and she had never known. Maribel ejected the drive with shaking hands and inserted another one. Subject 1, Naoma Fletcher. The screen filled with videos of a beautiful blonde woman with bright blue eyes. The earliest video was dated 1994, showing Naoma leaving a gym in Boston. Oswin's voice described her as his first successful long-term acquisition. The videos showed Naoma and Oswin dating, marrying, moving into a house together. Everything looked normal until Maribel noticed something chilling. The timestamps jumped. Months of footage, then nothing, then a final video dated December 1996. The last video showed a dark basement with concrete walls. Naoma was there, her face gaunt and terrified, pleading with the camera. "Please, Oswin, please let me go. I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home." Oswin's voice responded from behind the camera, cold and clinical. Subject 1 has become non-compliant. Excessive emotional displays. Failed to adapt to maintenance protocols. Termination necessary. The screen went black. Maribel vomited into the wastebasket beside the desk, her entire body convulsing with horror. Terminated. He had killed her. Her husband had murdered that woman. Maribel's mind raced through terrible possibilities. How many of the women on the wall had been terminated? What had happened to the ones marked as relocated? Were they still alive somewhere, or was that just another word for disposal? She thought about the times Oswin had traveled for work, sometimes for weeks at a time. Had he been hunting, selecting, acquiring new subjects? The man she thought she knew had never existed. She had been sleeping next to a monster. She forced herself to check more USB drives, needing to understand the full scope of Oswin's crimes even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Subject 4, Subject 9, Subject 15. The pattern was always the same. Oswin would select a woman, study her for months, engineer a meeting that seemed coincidental, begin a romantic relationship, and then slowly isolate her. Some women escaped before it went too far, marked as relocated after they broke up with him or moved away. But others stayed, and those were the ones marked terminated or current. Maribel realized with sudden, horrible clarity that she was the only one still alive who had stayed. Subject 7. She had survived for 23 years in Oswin's collection. But why? What made her different from Naoma and the others who had been terminated? She thought about Oswin's final journal entry mentioning Subject 44. He had been planning to replace her. If he had not died from a heart attack, would she have ended up in a basement somewhere, pleading for her life while he recorded her final moments? The thought made her hands shake so violently she could barely type on the keyboard. She needed help. She needed to call the police. But first, she needed to know how deep this nightmare went. Maribel spent the entire night in the office, unable to tear herself away from the horrifying evidence surrounding her. As dawn light filtered through the curtains, she found a locked filing cabinet behind Oswin's desk. Using the crowbar, she pried it open, and manila folders spilled onto the floor. Each folder corresponded to a woman on the wall. She grabbed the one labeled Subject 1, Naoma Fletcher, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were news clippings from Boston papers dated December 1996. Missing woman vanishes without trace. One headline read. Family pleads for information on daughter's whereabouts. The articles described Naoma as a 28-year-old marketing consultant who disappeared after telling friends she was going to visit her boyfriend's family for Christmas. Her car was found abandoned at a bus station in Portland, Maine. Police investigated but found no evidence of foul play. The case went cold. Oswin had gotten away with murder because no one suspected the charming attorney she had been dating. Maribel felt sick reading Naoma's mother's quotes in the articles. "We just want to bring her home. We need to know what happened." Now Maribel knew what happened, and the truth was unbearable. She pulled out more folders, finding similar patterns. Subject 4, Calla Brennan, disappeared in 1999 from Albany, New York. Subject 9, a woman named Wren Tessler, vanished in 2004 from Manchester, New Hampshire. At least 7 women were marked as terminated, each one with news clippings documenting their mysterious disappearances. Oswin had been killing women for decades, and he had been meticulous about avoiding detection. He varied his hunting grounds, never taking 2 women from the same city. He used different names when dating them, different cover stories. The police had never connected the cases. Maribel's breath caught when she found a hand-drawn map tucked into one folder. It showed the property surrounding their farmhouse, with several locations marked with red X's. One X was labeled Subject 1, another Subject 4, and others had numbers she recognized from the wall. Her blood turned to ice. They were buried here, on her property. She had been living on top of a graveyard for 23 years, gardening and planting flowers while bodies rotted beneath the soil. She stumbled to the window and looked out at the familiar landscape with new horror. The morning sun illuminated the property in golden light. Beyond the house, she could see the barn where Oswin kept his tools, the garden she had lovingly maintained, and the small orchard of apple trees he had planted shortly after they moved in. The map indicated that Subject 1 was buried beneath the apple trees. Maribel had picked apples from those trees every autumn, made pies, pressed cider. She had sat beneath them on summer afternoons, reading books and feeling peaceful. And all that time, Naoma Fletcher had been beneath the ground, her family never knowing what happened. Maribel knew she had to call the police immediately. This was beyond anything she could handle alone. But as she reached for her phone, she noticed another folder marked with her own name. Unlike the others, this one was thick, bursting with documents. She opened it and found something that made her blood run cold. Inside were detailed plans for her own termination. Oswin had been meticulous, documenting everything. Subject 7 showing signs of aging. Collection value diminishing. Termination scheduled for spring 2025. Will stage as hiking accident in the White Mountains. The date was circled in red. March 15th, 2 weeks from when Oswin had died. He had been planning to kill her within days. The heart attack that killed him had saved her life without her ever knowing she was in danger. Maribel sank to the floor, the folder clutched to her chest, and sobbed. She had loved this man. She had built a life with him. And he had been counting down the days until he could dispose of her like trash and move on to Subject 44. Every kind word, every gentle touch, every moment of seeming tenderness had been a lie. She had been nothing but a thing to him, an object in his collection. When her tears finally stopped, something shifted inside Maribel. The shock and horror began to crystallize into something harder and colder. Rage. Pure, burning rage at what Oswin had done to her, to Naoma, to all the women whose faces stared from the walls. He had stolen years of their lives, and he had ended the lives of at least 7 of them. But he was dead now, beyond justice, beyond punishment. Maribel could not make him suffer for what he had done. But she could do something else. She could make sure the world knew what kind of monster he had been. She could give Naoma's family answers. She could bring those women home. Standing on shaking legs, Maribel picked up her phone and dialed 911, her voice steady despite everything. "I need to report multiple murders," she said. "And I know where the bodies are buried." The Vermont State Police arrived within an hour, 3 cruisers speeding down the dirt road with sirens wailing. Maribel met them on the porch, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, her face pale and her hands clutching the folders. Detective Lowell Marsh stepped out of the lead car, a tall man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself gently, as if sensing that Maribel was barely holding herself together. She led him and 2 other officers inside, straight to the office, not trusting her voice to explain what she had found. Detective Marsh stopped in the doorway, his expression hardening as he took in the walls of photographs and surveillance equipment. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. He turned to the other officers. "Call this in. We need forensics, we need cadaver dogs, and we need to secure this entire property as a crime scene immediately." He looked at Maribel with something close to pity. "Ma'am, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. But first, I need you to step outside. This is now an active crime scene, and we cannot have anyone contaminating evidence." Maribel led Detective Marsh to the kitchen while officers swarmed through the house. She made coffee with shaking hands and then sat across from him at the table where she had eaten thousands of meals with Oswin. The normalcy of the kitchen felt surreal against the nightmare unfolding around her. She told Marsh everything, starting with the locked door, the photographs, the USB drives, the journal entries. She handed him the folders documenting each woman and the map showing burial locations. Marsh's jaw tightened as he reviewed the evidence, making notes in a leather notebook. "Mrs. Hoffman, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Marsh said carefully. "Did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities? Any suspicions at all?" Maribel felt anger flare. "No," she said firmly. "I had no idea. I thought he was an attorney working from home. He told me the office was locked because of client confidentiality. I trusted him. For 23 years, I trusted him completely." Marsh nodded. "I believe you. But I have to ask. These questions will come up during the investigation." Maribel understood, but it still stung. She was a victim, but she would also be a suspect until proven otherwise. By noon, the farmhouse had transformed into a hub of law enforcement activity. Forensic teams photographed every inch of the office, carefully bagging evidence. Cadaver dogs arrived and were led to the locations marked on Oswin's map. Maribel watched from the porch as the dogs alerted at the apple orchard, the area behind the barn, and 2 spots in the woods beyond the property line. Officers began cordoning off those areas with yellow tape. This was real. Those women were really buried there. Oswin had really killed them. The truth she had discovered was not some nightmare she might wake from. Detective Marsh returned to the porch, his face grim. "We are beginning excavations at the marked locations. This will take time, possibly days or weeks. I need you to find somewhere else to stay. You cannot be here during the investigation." Maribel nodded numbly. She had nowhere to go. Her parents had died years ago, and she had lost touch with most of her friends after moving to the farmhouse. Oswin had made sure of that. "I will find a hotel," she said quietly. Marsh hesitated. "Mrs. Hoffman, there is something else you need to know. The media is going to descend on this story like locusts. Your name will be everywhere. Your life will be examined from every angle. I strongly suggest you retain an attorney." The mention of an attorney made Maribel think of Oswin and feel sick. But Marsh was right. She needed legal protection. "Can you recommend someone?" she asked. Marsh pulled out a business card. "Jareth Keene. He is a criminal defense attorney in Burlington. Good man. Tell him I sent you." Maribel took the card, adding it to the growing pile of evidence that her old life was over. Everything she thought she knew had been a lie. Even this house, which she had believed was her home, was actually a tomb. She could never live here again, not after what she now knew rested beneath the soil. As the sun began to set, Maribel packed a suitcase with trembling hands. She moved through the bedroom she had shared with Oswin, taking only essential items and carefully avoiding looking at the wedding photo on the dresser. She paused at the closet where Oswin's clothes still hung, smelling faintly of his cologne. 23 years. She had given him 23 years of her life, and he had been planning to murder her. She grabbed the wedding photo and threw it against the wall, glass shattering. Then she walked out of the farmhouse without looking back, driving away as police lights painted the twilight in shades of blue and red. Maribel checked into a small hotel in Burlington under her maiden name, Thorne, hoping for anonymity. But by the next morning, her hope shattered with a phone call from Detective Marsh. "It has hit the news," he said grimly. "Every major outlet. You should prepare yourself." Maribel turned on the television and saw her own face staring back at her from every channel. "Wife of serial killer lived above mass grave for decades," one headline screamed. "Vermont horror, attorney kept gruesome secret from unsuspecting spouse," read another. They showed aerial footage of her farmhouse surrounded by police vehicles and excavation equipment. The reporters were not kind. Some speculated that Maribel must have known something. How could a wife be so blind? Others painted her as a victim, but in a way that made her seem weak and foolish. She watched herself described as isolated, controlled, almost complicit in her ignorance. The narrative being built around her felt suffocating. She was either a villain who helped her husband or a pathetic victim too stupid to notice. Neither version acknowledged the truth that she had been carefully manipulated by a monster who spent decades perfecting his methods. Her phone began ringing incessantly. Reporters had somehow gotten her number. They wanted interviews, statements, exclusive rights to her story. Maribel turned the phone off after the 30th call. She felt like an animal in a cage, trapped and exposed. When she ventured to the hotel lobby to get coffee, people stared and whispered. The desk clerk gave her a look of mingled curiosity and revulsion. Maribel retreated to her room and did not leave for 2 days, surviving on room service and bottling her screaming anxiety. On the 3rd day, she called the attorney Marsh had recommended. Jareth Keene agreed to meet her immediately at his office downtown. Maribel wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to disguise herself as she hurried from her car to the office building. It worked until a reporter spotted her in the parking garage. "Mrs. Hoffman, did you know about your husband's crimes? Did you help him dispose of bodies?" The questions felt like physical blows. Security guards escorted Maribel inside while cameras flashed behind her. Jareth Keene was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with warm brown skin and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was filled with books and had a view of Lake Champlain. He gestured for Maribel to sit and poured her water from a glass pitcher. "First thing you need to know," he said gently, "is that you are not under investigation. Detective Marsh has made it clear to the district attorney that you are a victim in this case. But we need to be smart about how we handle the media and any potential civil suits from the victims' families. Civil suits. Maribel had not even thought about that possibility. Can they sue me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jareth nodded. They can try. Vermont law might allow claims against the estate, which includes marital property. We will fight it, but you need to be prepared for a long battle. More immediately, we need to craft a statement for the media. You will not be doing interviews, but we need to control the narrative before it spirals further. He pulled out a legal pad. Tell me everything again. Every detail. I need to understand the full scope of what Oswin did so I can protect you. Maribel spent 3 hours walking Jareth through everything she had discovered. He listened without interruption, taking notes, his expression growing darker as she described the videos, the journals, the termination plans. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. Mrs. Hoffman, Maribel, this is one of the most horrific cases I have encountered in 20 years of practice. Your husband was a sophisticated predator who weaponized trust and intimacy. What happened to you is not your fault. Do you understand me? You were not stupid. You were not complicit. You were targeted and manipulated by someone with decades of experience. His words broke something open inside Maribel. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but the validation from someone who understood the law and manipulation made tears stream down her face. She cried for the first time since calling the police, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Jareth handed her tissues and waited patiently until she could breathe again. We are going to get through this, he said firmly. Together. But I need you to be strong. The worst is not over yet. Detective Marsh told me this morning that they have recovered the first body. Naoma Fletcher. Her family has been notified. And there will be 6 more. The excavation of Maribel's property took 12 days. Each evening, Detective Marsh called with updates that grew heavier with each conversation. They found Naoma Fletcher beneath the apple trees, just as Oswin's map indicated. Then Calla Brennan behind the barn. Ren Tesler in the woods. One by one, 7 bodies were recovered, 7 women who had disappeared over 2 decades. Forensic analysis confirmed the causes of death: suffocation, strangulation, blunt force trauma. Oswin had killed them in different ways, like he was experimenting. Maribel vomited every time Marsh gave her these details, but she forced herself to listen. These women deserved to be remembered. The families of the victims appeared on television, and Maribel watched every interview even though it destroyed her. Naoma's mother, now in her 70s, wept openly. For 29 years, I did not know where my daughter was. 29 years of wondering, hoping, praying. Now I know she was murdered by a monster, and it brings no peace. Calla's brother spoke with controlled rage. My sister was vibrant and full of life. He took that from her. He took her from us. And his wife lived in that house, walked on my sister's grave, and never knew. The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. Maribel understood their anger. She would be angry too if she were them. But the implication that she should have known, that she could have prevented this, felt crushingly unfair. She had been a victim too, even if she had survived. Oswin had stolen 23 years of her life, had planned to kill her, had turned her into an unwitting accomplice simply by keeping her in the dark. But she could not say any of this publicly without seeming defensive or self-centered. The victims' families deserved their grief without her inserting herself into their tragedy. Jareth released a carefully worded statement on her behalf. Mrs. Hoffman is devastated by the discoveries at her former home. She had no knowledge of her husband's crimes and is cooperating fully with law enforcement. She grieves for the victims and their families and asks for privacy during this difficult time. The statement did little to quell the media frenzy. Opinion pieces appeared in newspapers debating whether Maribel bore any moral responsibility. True crime podcasts dissected her marriage, analyzing photos from social media and interviews with people who barely knew her. She became a ghost in her own life, watching strangers define who she was. One afternoon, Maribel received a call from an unknown number. She almost did not answer, expecting another reporter. But something made her pick up. "Hello?" A woman's voice responded, trembling and emotional. "Mrs. Hoffman? My name is Cassidy Lennox. I think your husband tried to kill me too." Maribel's blood froze. Cassidy explained that she had dated someone named Owen Hastings in 2018, a man who looked exactly like Oswin based on photos she had seen in the news. "He was so charming at first. But then he got possessive. He wanted me to move in with him. He talked about going somewhere remote where we could be alone. Something felt wrong, so I broke up with him. He vanished after that. I always wondered what would have happened if I had said yes." Maribel asked Cassidy to contact Detective Marsh immediately. After they hung up, she sat in stunned silence. Subject 44. Cassidy must have been Oswin's next target, the woman he mentioned in his final journal entry. She had escaped by trusting her instincts. How many other women had narrowly avoided Oswin's trap? How many had dated him briefly and then broken things off, never knowing they had been auditioning for a role in his collection? The scope of his predation seemed to expand with every passing day. Detective Marsh called that evening to confirm that Cassidy's story checked out. "We found files on her in your husband's computer," he said. She was subject 44. He had been surveilling her for 6 months before he approached her. There are also files on 3 other women he was watching. They have all been contacted and warned. Marsh paused. "Mrs. Hoffman, I need to tell you something. We found another map in your husband's safe deposit box. There are 2 more properties. One in Maine, one in New Hampshire. Both purchased under shell companies in the 1990s. We are getting warrants to search them tomorrow." Maribel felt the room spin. More properties meant more potential victims. How many women had Oswin killed? 7 bodies at the farmhouse, but if there were other sites, the number could be much higher. She thought about all the times Oswin had traveled for work, sometimes for weeks. Had he been maintaining other collections in other states? The man she married was not just a serial killer. He was a prolific monster who had built an entire secret life around abducting, controlling, and murdering women. And she had shared a bed with him for 23 years, never suspecting. That night, Maribel did not sleep. She sat by the hotel window, watching the city lights and wondering if she would ever feel safe or sane again. The searches of the Maine and New Hampshire properties yielded results that made national headlines. At the Maine property, a secluded cabin in a rustic county, police found 3 more bodies. At the New Hampshire site, an old farmhouse near the White Mountains, they found 4. 14 victims total, spanning from 1994 to 2024. Oswin had been killing women for 30 years, carefully spacing out the murders and varying his methods and locations to avoid detection. The FBI officially classified him as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Maribel's name was attached to every article, every broadcast, every true crime episode about the case. The additional victims had families who deserved answers. The FBI organized a press conference where Detective Marsh and federal agents outlined the full scope of the investigation. Maribel watched from her hotel room as they displayed photos of all 14 victims, young women with bright smiles and futures that Oswin had stolen. The oldest victim had been 24. The youngest, barely 21. Oswin had preferred a certain type, intelligent, isolated, vulnerable in ways that were not immediately obvious. Women who could disappear without immediate alarm because they lived alone or had distant families. Marsh also revealed details about Oswin's methods that made Maribel's skin crawl. He had used different identities for different hunting grounds. In Maine, he was Owen Hastings, a real estate developer. In New Hampshire, Oliver Harmon, a freelance photographer. In Vermont, he used his real name but kept his hunting separate from his marriage. He had meticulous systems for maintaining multiple lives, including separate bank accounts, P.O. boxes, and storage units filled with surveillance equipment. He had been methodical, patient, and terrifyingly intelligent. The press conference also addressed the question everyone was asking: did Maribel know? Marsh was clear and firm. Mrs. Hoffman had absolutely no knowledge of her husband's crimes. She is a victim of his manipulation and control. The evidence shows that Oswin Hoffman spent decades perfecting his ability to compartmentalize and deceive. He fooled law enforcement, he fooled his colleagues, and he fooled his wife. Anyone suggesting Mrs. Hoffman bears responsibility for these crimes is engaging in harmful victim blaming. The words helped, but they could not stop the deluge of online hatred directed at her. Maribel read the comments on news articles against Jarrett's advice. Strangers said she must have been willfully blind, that she probably enjoyed living off the money Oswin made from his law practice, that she deserved to be prosecuted as an accessory. The cruelty was breathtaking. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her sense of reality, and people treated her like a criminal. Some comments were even worse, suggesting she should have been one of his victims. The hatred made her feel hollow inside, like she was disappearing. One morning, Maribel received a letter forwarded from Jarrett's office. It was from Naoma Fletcher's mother, Ruth. Maribel's hands shook as she opened it, expecting more anger and blame. But the letter surprised her. "Dear Maribel," it began. "I have watched you become a target of public hatred, and my heart breaks for you. My daughter was taken from me by a monster. You were taken from yourself by the same monster. We are not enemies. We are both his victims. If you are willing, I would like to meet you. I think we both need to look into the eyes of someone who understands what he took from us." Maribel called Ruth that afternoon, and they agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in Montpelier, away from Burlington's media swarm. When Maribel arrived, she immediately recognized Ruth from television interviews, an elegant woman with silver hair and Naoma's same blue eyes. Ruth stood and embraced Maribel tightly, and they both cried in the middle of the cafe while other patrons pretended not to stare. They talked for 3 hours, sharing stories about Oswin's charm, his manipulation, his ability to make them feel special and seen. Ruth described Naoma as funny, ambitious, and kind. Maribel realized she would have liked Naoma if they had met under different circumstances. "He took her life, and he took 30 years of mine wondering what happened," Ruth said, gripping Maribel's hand across the table. "But he took 23 years of your life too, years you can never get back. You lost time just like I did. You lost yourself. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving." Those words cracked something open in Maribel's chest. For the first time since opening that office door, she felt like someone truly understood. Not a detective or lawyer or therapist, but someone who had walked through the same darkness and emerged on the other side. By the time they parted, Ruth and Maribel had exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. As Maribel drove back to Burlington, she felt something shift inside her. The shame that had been suffocating her began to lift, replaced by something fiercer. Anger. Not the helpless, directionless rage she had felt before, but focused determination. Oswin had tried to destroy her, had planned to kill her, but he had failed. He was dead and she was alive. She could either let his crimes define her forever, or she could take control of her own story. For the first time since discovering the truth, Maribel knew what she needed to do. Maribel called Jareth the next morning with a decision that made him pause. "I want to do an interview," she said. "A real one. Recorded, public. I want to tell my story in my own words before someone else defines me forever." Jareth was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure? Once you go public, you cannot take it back. The scrutiny will intensify." Maribel felt certain in a way she had not felt since before Oswin died. "I am sure. These families deserve to hear from me directly. And I deserve to stop hiding like I did something wrong." Jareth reached out to a reputable journalist named Daria Colton who had covered the case fairly and with sensitivity toward the victims. Daria agreed to a long-form recorded interview with strict conditions, no gotcha questions, no ambush tactics, just Maribel's story told honestly. They met at Jareth's office with cameras rolling. Maribel sat across from Daria, her hands folded in her lap, and took a deep breath. "I know people think I should have known," she began. "I have asked myself that same question 10,000 times. How could I live with a monster and not see it? The answer is that he was not a monster to me. He was charming, attentive, and loving. He made me feel safe. And that was exactly how he wanted me to feel." Maribel walked Daria through the entire timeline. Meeting Oswin at the bookstore, the whirlwind romance, the gradual isolation disguised as romantic devotion. She explained how Oswin had slowly cut her off from friends and family, making it seem like her choice. "He never forbade me from seeing people," Maribel said. "He was too smart for that. Instead, he would get quiet and hurt when I made plans. He would ask if he was not enough for me. He made me feel guilty for wanting anything outside our marriage. Eventually, it was easier to just stop trying." She described discovering the office, seeing the photographs, watching the videos. Daria's face grew pale as Maribel recounted finding Naoma's final video and realizing Oswin had murdered multiple women. "The man I loved never existed," Maribel said, her voice breaking. "He was a character Oswin created to trap me. For 23 years, I lived with a performance. And when I discovered the truth, I learned that he was planning to kill me within weeks. I survived by pure chance because his heart gave out before he could follow through on his plan." The interview lasted 4 hours. Maribel answered every question honestly, even the painful ones about whether she ever suspected anything. There were moments, she admitted. Times when something felt slightly off. But Oswin always had an explanation that made sense. "I trusted him completely because that is what you do in a marriage. You do not assume your husband is a serial killer because he locks his office door at night. That thought never crosses your mind because it is too absurd, too horrible. But it was real. And now I have to live with knowing I slept next to a man who killed 14 women and was planning to make me the 15th. Toward the end of the interview, Daria asked what Maribel wanted people to understand. Maribel looked directly into the camera. "I want the victims' families to know that I am so deeply sorry for what Oswin did. Sorry is not enough, but it is all I have. I wish I had known. I wish I could have stopped him. But I did not know, and I could not. I was his victim too, even though I survived. And to anyone who thinks they might be in a controlling relationship, please listen, isolation disguised as love is still isolation. Attention that feels like surveillance is still surveillance. If someone is slowly cutting you off from the world while making it seem like devotion, that is not love. That is control. And it can be deadly." The interview aired 2 weeks later as a special episode on a major news network. Maribel watched it at Jarrett's office, surrounded by him and a small group of supporters including Ruth Fletcher and two other victims' family members who had reached out to express solidarity. When it ended, the room was silent. Then Ruth squeezed Maribel's hand. "You were incredibly brave," she said. "Thank you for honoring Naoma and the others by telling the truth." Maribel felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release. The public response was mixed but significantly shifted in Maribel's favor. Many people who had condemned her online apologized or at least stopped attacking. Others remained convinced of her guilt, but their voices grew quieter. More importantly, Maribel began receiving messages from women across the country who recognized themselves in her story. Women in controlling relationships, women who had escaped predatory partners, women who understood that manipulation could be invisible until it was too late. Maribel read every message, and each one strengthened her resolve. She had survived Oswin's plan to destroy her. Now she would make sure his crimes served a purpose: education, awareness, and prevention. 6 months after discovering Oswin's office, Maribel stood in front of a community center in Burlington, preparing to speak at an event about recognizing coercive control in relationships. Ruth Fletcher sat in the front row, along with Cassidy Lennox, the woman who had nearly become Subject 44. Also present were 3 sisters of other victims and a dozen women who had escaped controlling relationships. Maribel's hands trembled as she approached the microphone, but her voice was steady when she began to speak. "My name is Maribel Thorne. I reclaimed my maiden name because the name Hoffman died with my husband. I am here to tell you that survival is possible, and healing is real." She talked for 40 minutes about the warning signs she had missed, the gradual erosion of autonomy disguised as care, and the importance of maintaining connections outside a romantic relationship. She explained how predators like Oswin targeted women strategically, looking for vulnerability and isolation. "He did not choose me randomly," Maribel said. "He studied me for months before we met. He knew I was far from my family, focused on my thesis, and eager for love. He engineered our meeting to seem like fate. And I fell for it because I wanted to believe in romance and destiny. There is no shame in wanting love. The shame belongs entirely to the people who weaponize that desire." After her talk, several women approached with their own stories. A young woman named Trina described how her boyfriend monitored her phone and isolated her from friends. An older woman named Kelda talked about her late husband's financial control and emotional manipulation. Each story was different in details but similar in pattern: control disguised as care, isolation disguised as devotion, surveillance disguised as concern. Maribel listened to every story, offered resources, and exchanged contact information. She was building something, a network of survivors who could support each other. Maribel had also been working with Jareth on a civil matter: what to do with Oswin's estate. After extensive legal battles, the court determined that proceeds from the sale of all properties connected to Oswin's crimes would be divided among the victims' families. Maribel voluntarily relinquished any claim to marital assets, wanting nothing that came from Oswin. She sold her wedding ring and the few possessions she had kept from the farmhouse, donating the money to organizations that supported survivors of domestic violence and coercive control. She found a small apartment in Burlington with large windows that let in sunlight. She painted the walls bright colors and filled the space with plants. She adopted a rescue dog named Story who slept at the foot of her bed and made the apartment feel less empty. She started teaching online courses about literature, returning to the passion Oswin had slowly stolen from her. She reconnected with old friends from graduate school, explaining honestly what had happened and accepting their support without shame. Slowly, piece by piece, she rebuilt a life that was entirely her own. Ruth Fletcher became a close friend, calling weekly to check in and share stories about Naoma. Through Ruth, Maribel learned who her husband's first victim had really been: funny, intelligent, passionate about environmental causes, loved by everyone who knew her. Maribel kept a photo of Naoma on her bookshelf, along with photos of the other 13 victims. She felt it was important to remember them not as numbers or case files, but as real women with real lives that had been stolen. Some people thought this was morbid, but Maribel disagreed. Forgetting them would be the real tragedy. 1 year after discovering Oswin's office, Maribel received a call from Detective Marsh. The FBI had closed the case, confirming 14 victims with no evidence of additional crimes. Oswin's properties had been fully searched, his computers thoroughly analyzed, and his past investigated back to childhood. "It is over," Marsh said. "As over as these things can be." "How are you doing, Mrs. Thorne?" Maribel looked around her sunny apartment, at Story sleeping in a patch of sunlight, at the stack of student essays she was grading. "I am rebuilding," she said honestly. "Some days are harder than others. But I am here. I am alive. And I get to decide what comes next." After hanging up, Maribel walked to her desk and opened her laptop. She had been writing her story, the full story, not for publication but for herself. A way to process everything that had happened and reclaim her narrative from the media's circus. As she typed, she thought about Naoma and Kala and Ren and all the others. She thought about the life she had lost and the life she was building. She thought about Oswin's final journal entry, his plan to dispose of her and move on to subject 44. But he had failed. She had survived. And while she could never undo the past, she could make sure the future was different. She could warn others. She could support survivors. She could live fully and freely in a way that honored both herself and the women who never got that chance. Maribel saved her document, closed the laptop, and walked outside into the bright afternoon. The locked door was open now. The truth was told. And for the first time in 23 years, she was truly free.